After so long, we got a beautiful day.
I wish he comes home safely.
On the 19th of January 2025, in an unprecedented diplomatic breakthrough, Israel and Hamas agreed to implement the ceasefire agreement. The truce, mediated by the US, Qatar and Egypt, is expected to release hundreds of people. Dozens of hostages held by Hamas and hundreds of Palestinians imprisoned by Israel. In the first phase of the deal, 3 hostages were released by Hamas. In exchange, Israel released 90 Palestinian prisoners and detainees. The move has paused the 15-month-old war that brought a devastation and seismic political change to one of West Asia's bloodiest conflicts in Gaza. An estimated 90% of Gazans have been displaced by the Israel-Hamas war. With the ceasefire into effect now, many Palestinians return to what's left of their homes. The territory has changed drastically since the war. How much money will it take to rebuild Gaza? And who will govern Gaza? Let's find out. On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas launched a terror attack on Israel, taking 251 captives. In response to this cross-border attack, Israel launched a campaign to destroy Hamas, which is recognized as a terrorist organization by Israel, the US, and others. More than 46,700 people have been killed in Gaza since then. Reportedly, most of the 2.1 million population has also been displaced. There is a widespread destruction and severe shortages of food, fuel, medicine, and shelter. A ceasefire in war-ravaged Gaza offers a glimmer of hope. On the 19th of January 2025, Israel's government approved a ceasefire agreement with Hamas, which includes the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. This marks the most significant development in the 15-month conflict. So what does the ceasefire deal entail? Before this ceasefire deal, 117 hostages had been returned alive to Israel, with 105 released in a prisoner exchange deal. Previously, the majority of those released were freed during a short-lived hostage and ceasefire deal that lasted from November 24 to December 1st, 2023. The framework of the deal was announced on the 15th of January by Qatar, which mediated the agreement alongside the United States and Egypt. However, the full details of the ceasefire remain undisclosed. According to Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, the deal consists of 3 stages. Stage 1. The first stage spans 42 days or 6 weeks, involving a complete ceasefire. Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, including civilian women, female soldiers, children, the elderly, and those who are sick or wounded. In return, several Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails will be freed. During this phase, Israeli troops will withdraw from all populated areas of Gaza, allowing Palestinians to return to their neighborhoods. Stage 2. Former US President Joe Biden described the second stage as aiming for a permanent end to the war. It will see the release of remaining living hostages, including men, in exchange for more Palestinian prisoners. This phase will also involve the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. The third and final stage will focus on the reconstruction of Gaza, a process that could take years, and the return of any remaining hostages' bodies.
About 1/3 of the hostages held in Gaza are to be released. Israeli troops will begin to pull back from their positions. Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, and hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians can begin to go back to their former homes. The international community also will pour large amounts of desperately needed humanitarian aid into Gaza. The agreement is a major breakthrough, but it does not guarantee an end to the war. But its sponsors are hoping that it will jumpstart negotiations in a future phase aimed at ending the conflict altogether. That would mean a full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, the return of all remaining hostages, and ending a conflict that has caused widespread destruction and sorrow across the region.
The Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal, which took effect on the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration for a second term as US president, is aimed at ending the 15-month war in Gaza. On the 19th of January, 3 women hostages, Damari, Romy Gonen, and Doron Steinbrecher, was released by Hamas. They were handed over to the International Committee for the Red Cross in Gaza. They were then reunited with their families. Hours after Hamas freed 3 Israeli women hostages, Israel released 90 Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Fireworks were launched in celebration as buses carrying the Palestinian prisoners arrived in Ramallah on the West Bank, where thousands of people waited to welcome the returnees. Those freed from Israeli prisons included 69 women and 21 teenage boys from the West Bank and Jerusalem.
طلعت من النار على الجنة. طلعنا من الجحيم. قمعات، ضرب، غاز، بتعد وانت راسك على الارض، بفوتوا عليك، بضربوك، برشوك غاز، بسبوا عليك، بغلطوا عليك، عجبوا فينا يعني، ما سووش اكل فيش، حلو فيش، ملح فيش ولا اشي ولا اشي.
حرية، كنا نشوف السماء بس بمربعات صغيرة. كنا نحكي يا رب نشوف السماء بدون هالمربعات. تمنا أول ما طلعنا من باب السجن شفنا جبال الكرمل، شفنا السماء، شفنا كتير أشياء.
But Gazans who cheered in celebration over the truce soon found their happiness overshadowed by harsh reality when they returned to find their homes in ruins. Drone footage released by the United Nations revealed vast destruction in northern Gaza as those displaced began returning to bombed-out neighborhoods. Joma Shadi was one of those who returned to inspect his home in north of Nuseirat. Shadi was hit by reality to find his home in rubbles.
وقف شلال الدم اللي بيصير هذا شعور لا يوصف والحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله اللي خرجنا منها سالمين غانمين الحمد لله رب العالمين ولكن أتينا إلى بيوتنا وهذا الخراب وهذا الدمار هذا البيت أنا بنيته قطعة قطعة دهنته سويته رجعت على بيتي مش بيت أنا مش لاقي بيت أنا شايف هنا خراب بيوت مش شايف بيوت.
But for the members of the Abu Mohsen family, the situation was unexpectedly different. The family breathed a sigh of relief as they returned home and found that their property was still intact.
والله شعور لا يوصف هو فرحة تامة مع إنه في ناس اللي في جنوب رفح هم مش هيشعروا نفس الشعور لما يرجعوا يلاقوا بيوتهم بما إنها ممسوحة المناطق مسح مش هيحسوا بنفس شعورنا سيكون فرحة مخلوطة بالحزن.
The first phase of Israel-Hamas ceasefire will last 42 days, though the sounds of bombing are replaced by celebrations. As the ceasefire began, the reality facing people across Gaza remains extreme and despondent. Before the war, most of Gaza's 2.3 million people lived in its four main cities, Rafah and Khan Yunis in the south, Deir al-Balah in the center, and Gaza City, which was home to 775,000 people. But almost the whole population have now been displaced. Entire districts have been razed to the ground. Agricultural lands have been reduced to sand and rubble. About 1.8 million people are experiencing acute food insecurity, including nearly 133,000 people facing catastrophic food insecurity. Even before the current conflict, about 80% of the population of Gaza was in need of humanitarian aid. Aid deliveries stopped for about 10 days when Israel and Egypt closed their crossings after 7 October, but later resumed at much lower levels. Israel insists there are no limits to the amount of aid that can be delivered into and across Gaza, and blames UN agencies for failing to distribute supplies. It is only after the ceasefire deal more than 630 humanitarian aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip on 19th January.
While many challenges lie ahead, we should appreciate the long overdue relief this moment provides for Palestinians in Gaza and the hostages reunited with their loved ones. We are doing our part to ensure the rapid scaling up of humanitarian deliveries. More than 630 trucks with humanitarian aid entered Gaza yesterday, at least 300 of them to the north.
The conflict has also devastated Gaza's economy. The World Bank said Gaza's economy had contracted by 86% in the first quarter of 2024. It said it is the largest economic contraction on record. Reportedly, almost 100% of the population is now living in poverty, compared with 64% before the war. And the cost of basic supplies has risen by almost 250%. The UN's Trade and Development Arm says that the cost of the damage caused by the war is an estimated $18.5 billion, about 7 times Gaza's entire gross domestic product in 2022. Gazans hoped the latest ceasefire could finally bring peace, but the United Nations has warned it could take years or even decades for the territory to recover. According to assessments from the United Nations, billions of dollars will be needed to rebuild Gaza after the war between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Before any reconstruction can begin in Gaza, it faces the monumental task of debris removal. The UN estimates that over 50 million tons of rubble are scattered across the region. A process that could take up to 15 years to clear, even with more than 100 trucks working full-time. Critical infrastructure such as hospitals, water systems, and electricity networks lies in complete ruins, further complicating the restoration of basic services. The scale of recovery will require billions of dollars. International aid depends heavily on political stability and a clear governance plan. A phased ceasefire proposes a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan, but challenges remain. The deal does not address who will govern Gaza after the conflict, or how the blockade may be lifted to allow for the import of necessary materials and equipment. While the US and international bodies are pushing for Palestinian Authority to take control, Israel opposes any such role of authority, leaving Gaza's residents trapped in tent camps with no clear future ahead.
After the ceasefire deal was announced, Palestine's President Mahmoud Abbas says that the Palestinian Authority is ready to assume full responsibility in post-war Gaza. It would include the return of the displaced, providing basic services and reconstruction of the war-torn territory. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani cautions that Gazans should only dictate the way the enclave will be governed and no other country. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland 2 days after the ceasefire in Gaza, Qatar Prime Minister hoped the Palestinian Authority would return to play a governing role in Gaza once the war with Israel comes to an end. The ceasefire agreement was mediated by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. It includes a truce, the exchange of Israeli captives for Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, and a surge in humanitarian aid deliveries.
We hope to see the PA back in Gaza. We hope to see them, to see a government that will really address the issues of the people over there. And there are a lot, and there is a long way to go with Gaza and the destruction. Look, what we have seen in the images in the press and the news for the last 15 months didn't make justice for the real situation over there. And now we will start to see what's real catastrophe it left behind it.
However, outgoing U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said last week that the PA should run the coastal territory. Donald Trump, the new U.S. president, expresses doubts over the long-term stability of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas.
How confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of the deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the 2 states?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Among the executive orders Trump signed upon taking office was a decision to rescind sanctions that the Biden administration had against Israel. These sanctions targeted Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Donald Trump also spoke on the potential for rebuilding Gaza. He suggests that with the right approach, Gaza could be transformed.
My mind. You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
What I'm more worried about is the long-term sustainability of the deal. It's a three-phased agreement that from 16 days into the first phase, which is going to last for 6 weeks, is going to already require negotiations to get to the second phase. A lot of the details of the second phase and the release of further hostages and Palestinian prisoners have not been agreed upon. The terms and conditions of Israel's withdrawal from Gaza also remain unclear. And lastly, and I think most critically, is the longer-term process of governance in Gaza and a political horizon for peace, a political settlement that could realize Palestinian aspirations for statehood remain completely undiscussed.
Just 2 days before Trump's inauguration, on the 18th of January, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he sees the ceasefire as temporary and vows to strike Hamas if the second stage of the ceasefire proves pointless.
גם הנשיא טראמפ וגם הנשיא ביידן נתנו גיבוי מלא לזכותה של ישראל לחזור ללחימה אם ישראל תגיע למסקנה שהמשא ומתן על שלב ב' הוא חסר תוחלת. אני מאוד מעריך את זה. אם נצטרך לחזור ללחימה, אנחנו נעשה זאת בדרכים חדשות, ונעשה זאת בעוצמה רבה מאוד.
The future of the Gaza Strip depends on the ability of the Palestinian people to achieve unity and their own internal arrangements. Abandoning this will make it consistently difficult for the international community to directly address the issues in the Gaza Strip. And meanwhile, after the ceasefire, Israel may continue to impose a blockade on the Gaza Strip, which will lead to more violence and exacerbate the internal chaos within Palestine.
The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is currently in effect. But many questions are still up in the air. Who will lead the reconstruction of Gaza? What does the future hold for the region? The United States believes that Gaza needs to be rebuilt. But the Gaza Strip can't be treated merely as another construction site. The task of rebuilding this Palestinian enclave will be one of the most challenging reconstruction efforts in modern history.